Hello, my name is Misho Minkov. I'm a professor of cultural anthropology and cross-cultural awareness at the Varna University of Management. And today I will give a couple of short presentations on culture and cultural differences across the world. I will start with the significance of the topic, why we need to study culture, and then I will continue with some definitions of culture, how culture is understood by different scientists, how it is studied, and I will explain the major models of national culture, which explain cultural differences across the world and the consequences or implications of those differences. I always start teaching about culture by provoking my students with a picture of some cultural peculiarity that they may not be familiar with. This, for example, is a picture of the ambassador of Papua New Guinea to the United Nations, taken recently, as far as I know. As you see, most people who are not familiar with the culture of Papua New Guinea would be surprised or even shocked by the way that he is dressed and by the way he realizes, I'm quite sure that he knows, that he looks strange in this way among everybody else at this session of the United Nations. But interestingly, he is doing it on purpose because he wants to reassure his cultural identity. And the message that he's sending is, I know that you may be shocked, but I'm also shocked by some features in your cultures. Consequently, we need to understand our cultural differences and respect them. This picture is also interesting because it explains how the study of culture began a long time ago, more than 100 years, maybe 120, 150 years. At that time, European and American scientists began to explore cultures outside Europe and the United States. They traveled to Africa, to Papua New Guinea, to Southeast Asia, tropical Latin America, the Amazon, and they discovered cultural differences that they could not explain. For example, they would see somebody like this person, they would be shocked, and they would wonder why this person is dressed like this. Is there some meaning? There must be some meaning in this attire. And culture at that time was perceived as a combination of different symbols and meanings. It was seen as something like a language. When you visit a foreign culture that you don't understand, usually there's also a different language spoken by the local people. You try to learn and understand the language, and in the same way, you try to learn and understand the culture. So just like language, which has different meanings, culture was perceived as something consisting of different meanings. For instance, if you wink at somebody, this may have one meaning in one culture, but a completely different meaning in another culture. If you are dressed in black, that may have one meaning in one culture, but another meaning in a different culture. The picture of this onion is often used as a metaphor for culture. You know that onions have different layers. If you cut this onion across the middle, you will see that it consists of different layers, and this symbolizes culture. Outside, culture has a visible layer, just like this onion. You see how people are dressed. You see some behaviors. One of the first things that people notice when they go to a different culture is how people drive. And they're often shocked by the driving behavior of people in some places of the world. For example, when people from Northern Europe or the United States go to most places in Asia, they perceive the driving as chaotic and aggressive, and they wonder why this is so. To understand what you see on the surface, you need to get to the core, the center of the onion. And that center consists of something else. It's not visible behaviors, but it's something invisible. In the terminology of some famous cross-cultural specialists, culture is the software of the mind. This is an interesting parallel because you can see the hardware, the computer, but you cannot see the software inside. Likewise, you can see behaviors, you can see rituals, you can see what people eat and how they dress, but you cannot see what's in their heads, their values, their beliefs, their attitudes, all the things that produce this behavior that we call culture. And by the way, you probably know that culture also has a different meaning in many languages, especially in the European languages. Culture is sometimes used to mean arts. A ministry of culture is usually a ministry, at least in Europe. It's a ministry that takes care of museums and churches and other cultural artifacts. But in anthropology and in cross-cultural psychology and in cross-cultural management, culture has a different meaning. Culture is about these things that we see on the surface, behaviors and rituals and meanings and all kinds of different symbols. It's also about the core of the onion, values and beliefs and feelings and attitudes and all kinds of invisible things that are very important because they drive the behavior that we see outside.